The ancient Egyptians built one of the greatest empires in history, and despite facing many difficulties, managed to maintain their sovereignty over almost the entire Nile River Valley. But Africa has always been a gigantic continent, inhabited by many different peoples. Some wanted to conquer the fertile lands of Egypt. Kingdoms and tribes with origins in Libya, Syria, and Turkey were constantly fighting against Egypt. But there were a people whose tenacity and courage frightened even the powerful Egyptians. The Nubians were an African people who lived in the Nubia region in today's Sudan. The Nubian people have been living in that region for a long time. By 3100 BC, there would be Nubian villages along the River Nile. During much of their history, the Nubians did not develop any writing. Much of what we know about them is in the records left by the Egyptians. The Nubia was a region rich in gold veins, semi-precious stones, ebony wood, incense, and ivory. This wide range of resources encouraged the Egyptians to invade that region in search of extremely useful raw materials. The Nubians resisted the Egyptian invasions as much as possible, but they were militarily inferior and were progressively pushed south. Due to the various periods of instability in Egypt, the Nubians were able to organize more effective defenses. During periods of peace, Nubians and Egyptians traded and shared different forms of knowledge. During the reign of Pharaoh Thutmose I, the Nubians were part of the Egyptian Empire, but that dominion quickly collapsed, and the Nubians established a unified kingdom, with Napata as its capital. The Nubians thus founded the Kingdom of Kush, which would become a respected African power. The term Kushite kingdom comes from the Egyptians, who called the Nubian Kush. The founder of this new kingdom was a tribal leader named Alara, who became king of all the Nubians. With the Kushite kingdom established, the next step was to ensure its defense and economy. For this, Alara's successors reigned successfully, strengthening the kingdom and expanding their domains. The Kushites began to trade with Egypt through the Nile. They also established contact with the Arab kingdoms such as Nabatea and Sheba. The riches of the Kushites were extremely popular. Their leaders, priests, and even farm animals, like horses, were always embellished with pieces of gold and rubies. Over time, and due to the periods of instability in Egypt, the Kushites started to conquer Egyptian cities, including the city of Thebes. At the height of their power, under the command of King Paye, Egypt was fully conquered by the Kushites. King Paye declared himself the champion at the command of the god Amon. He joined his army, warred for over a year against several Egyptians, defeating everyone in his path. The phase of the Kushite and Egyptian history took place during the Third Intermediate Period of ancient Egypt, which began around the year 1070 BC. It is a period also historically known as the Nubian dynasty. The coexistence between Egyptians and Nubians originated marriages between the nobility of the two kingdoms. Both cultures influenced each other in religious and social matters. After consolidating the dominion in Egypt, King Paye returned to the city of Napata, capital of the Kushite kingdom, leaving his brother and successor to rule Egypt and its cities. Egypt remained under Kushite rule until 656 BC, and only weakened due to the Assyrian invasions, which conquered almost all of Egypt, causing turbulent pharaohs' lands. The Assyrians were fearsome warriors, much superior militarily. They already used iron weapons and armor, besides siege weapons and a well-trained cavalry. The Kushite rulers had to retreat to Napata. Sometime later, they founded the city of Meroitic further south. Meroitic became the new capital of the Kushite kingdom. The Kushite rulers adopted the Egyptian custom of erecting pyramids, being buried in those built in the city. During this period, the Kushites began to develop their writing, the Meroitic script. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus claimed that the Kushite kings reigned until they received an order from the priests of the Golden Temple. When this happened, they committed suicide and passed the power to the next sovereign. This strange custom lasted until the reign of the leader Ergomenes, different from most of his compatriots. He was an educated man, having studied with Greek teachers and learned philosophy. When Ergomenes was ordered to commit suicide, he was furious. He sent his soldiers to the temple to kill the priests, putting an end to this custom. Women also had important roles in Kushite society, having an active voice in everyday matters. For several times, Kushite queens reigned without the interference of male companions. There are even reports of Kushite women who fought in battles and commanded troops. The king's mother was given the title of Candace, which means Queen Mother. She was the king and queen's advisor. On some occasions, she participated in political negotiations and could even take full command. One of these powerful women, and perhaps the bravest of her people, was Yiseka'yah, who reigned in Kush when Rome had already conquered Egypt after the defeat of Mark Antony and Cleopatra. Rome demanded that the kingdom of Kush pay tribute to the Republic. Yiseka'yah did not accept this demand and considered it an offense, declaring war against Rome. Her soldiers advanced to pillage Egyptian cities under Roman rule. In 24 BC, the Kushites sacked the cities of Aswan, Philae, and Elephantine. They returned to Kush with prisoners, valuable objects, and Roman statues. Even the head of the statue of the Roman Emperor Augustus was taken by Yiseka'yah in a gesture of contempt against the enemy. Upon learning this, Augustus sent Roman general Petronius and his soldiers to punish the Kushites. There are few details about the battle, but Petronius may have said that the Kushites had more than 30,000 warriors and were fighting with frightening fury. Yiseka'yah was described as a corpulent and rough woman. She led her troops and became blind in one eye and being wounded by a Roman. After more than 3 years of fighting, the Romans finally proposed a peace agreement. In the year 20 BC, Romans and Kushites signed a peace treaty. The Roman emperor recognized the kingdom of Kush as an independent power without being obliged to pay taxes to Rome. The kingdom of Kush lasted until AD 350, but due to a lack of resources and trade, the kingdom was very weakened and dispersed. The once rich and proud Kushite kingdom ended up dominated by the Aksum Empire, which expanded its borders from the region of Ethiopia. The Kushites were an incredible people with brave warriors, skilled craftsmen, and wise merchants. Their history shows us the strength and perseverance of the African people, capable of repelling even the powerful Roman Empire.
Ça veut dire que Kushi signifie Yesh Hashem, il y a Dieu. Ça veut dire que dans l'Africain se trouve Dieu. C'est absolument incroyable. Dans les peuples africains se trouve le Dieu authentique qui a pour nom Yudke Vavke. Incroyable. Ça veut dire que caché à l'intérieur des peuples africains se trouve le véritable Dieu. Et c'est pour ça que en hébreu on appelle le noir Kushi, qui fait allusion à Yiseka'yah, Dieu se trouve à l'intérieur des peuples africains. Incroyable, incroyable. On va aller plus loin. Là, vous vous tenez bien, vous attachez vos ceintures pour pas tomber. Le mot Mashiach. Mashiach en hébreu, c'est le Messie. Le mot Mashiach, quand on tourne les lettres sans les changer, les deux premières lettres, c'est Mem Shin, qui veut dire Shem. Shem, c'est l'identité. Quelle est l'identité du Mashiach? Les deux premières lettres du mot Mashiach signifient l'identité. Et après, on a un Yud et un Chet, qui sont les deux premières lettres de Israël et Cham. Israël, Yud, Cham, l'origine des peuples africains, comme on va le voir dans quelques instants. Ça veut dire que le Mashiach porte l'identité du peuple d'Israël et des peuples africains.
לא הכל כושים מברכים, אלא צריך שיהיה כושי שאבא שלו ואימא שלו לבנים. איפה אתה תדע? אם אתה יודע, בפעם שאתה יודע, ואתה יצא להם בן קוף, יצא להם בן ככה. התקפות חמורות
של גורמי הטרור בסיני, והדבר הנורא ביותר, הצפה של מסתננים בלתי חוקיים מאפריקה.
And the black African Shemites. And I most probably shouldn't go here, but I will anyway. You see, after the destruction of the temple, yes, many of the Jews, the poor Jews, remained in the land, but there was a migration as well of the more affluent Jews to Yemen and to other parts of Africa. You see, the black African Shemites were actually then taken away in slave ships. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 68. And who were the owners of these slave ships? Who were the biggest slavers in the 16th century? The Ashkenazi were the biggest slavers in the 16th and 17th century, going into the 18th century. You see, Ashkenazi slaving was huge. This is from, I have to be careful when I say this, so my sources, it's always best to go with Jewish sources, right? Because you just trod on a bunch of toes. So we'll go with the Jewish sources. There's a ton of sources out there, but I'll stick with the Jewish ones because that's just safer. The Jewish scholar Jonathan Shorshak says this: Jewish merchants routinely possessed enormous numbers of slaves temporarily before selling them off. If a slave auction fell on a Jewish festival, it was postponed due to lack of buyers and sellers. The Jews of Suriname gave their slave plantations Hebrew names such as Machanaim, Nachamu, and Goshen. Rabbi Herbert Bloom adds that the slave trade was one of the most important Jewish activities. In 1694, Jews owned 9,000 African Shemites. Jewish slaving is in fact confirmed by the Jewish Encyclopedia.
So we have two different engraftings that are taking place. One engrafting of the scattered among the house of Israel, those Jewish tribes in Africa, back to the house of Israel. But there's another engrafting. There's a greater scattering of what's happened from Africa to the world. And that is the second of engrafting, even of African Americans back to the root in Africa, which is a Jewish root. And that's why Apostle Paul said it like this. Look at this, by the way. Here is what is going to happen in Africa. Are we ready for this? This is from Yitzhak Abarbanel, not from Rabbi Shapira. He says, Bechol pelech v'pelech, in each section, in each district, Yikreu b'shem Adonai. They will call in the name of Adonai. Umipiem yilmedu kol ha'am. Who are they going to teach Torah? They are going to teach Torah to the rest of the Jewish world. How is it possible that the people who are without Torah, who are away from Torah, going to speak about Torah to the entire natural branch? I'll just call it for a moment the known Jewish world. Friend, this is a miracle. A miracle is going to take place. You have to understand that we are in a time that God is going to do miracle. They're going to return in such a power with the spirit of the Mashiach that it will be called Pele. Look what it says. All the people will learn to them. The people will look at those scattered. The Torah scholars, the rabbis will look upon them and say, what is that? It will be a miracle. Why? It will be like a resurrection for the rest of the house of Israel, because many will call upon the name of God and will serve him. God is going to take the list and is going to make this ugly root that nobody wants, and is going to bring healing to the entire Jewish nation. To the entire Jewish nation. Now, the words of Rav Shaul, Apostle Paul, are so clear. Now, if the challah offered, Romans 11:16. Now, if the challah offered as produce is holy, so is the whole loaf. And if the root is holy, so are the branches.
And who were the owners of these slave ships? Who were the biggest slavers in the 16th century? The Ashkenazi were the biggest slavers in the 16th and 17th century, going into the 18th century. You see, Ashkenazi slaving was huge. The Ashkenazi slaving was huge.